As the night draws in, let the story of the dragon's watchtower sweep you away. Picture yourself in the quiet, mist-clad village of Vireth, standing before a tower that rises high into the fog, a silent sentinel to a forgotten past. The wind whispers tales of dragons, secrets, and a flame that burns with ancient power. Feel the cool air on your skin as Alira, a wanderer with no past to speak of, discovers the tower's call. The secrets she unravels will draw her into a journey where truth and sacrifice intertwine, and the fate of both dragons and men rests on the flame she holds. Relax, breathe deeply, and let the mystery of the watchtower unfold. Its ancient stones, the hum of wings, and the fire that calls to those brave enough to seek the truth. Let the journey begin. In the farthest corner of the world, where the land broke against the sea in jagged cliffs and swirling fog, a tower rose from the rocks like a shadowed sentinel. The Dragon's Watchtower, they called it, built in a time long forgotten, by hands no longer remembered. Its dark stone spiraled high into the mist, vanishing into the clouded sky. On clear days, which were rare, it gleamed in the sunlight like a blade, sharp and cold, standing alone against the horizon. But more often than not, it was shrouded in a veil of mist and mystery. Half hidden from view, a flickering silhouette in the distance. To the people of Vireth, the tower was both a beacon and a warning. Some whispered that it had been built by dragons in the age before men walked the earth, when their wings ruled the skies and their breath shaped mountains. Others claimed it was cursed, left behind by some ancient power to remind men of their fragile mortality. Children dared each other to climb the hill where it stood, but none ever reached the top. Those who wandered too close to its crumbling stones returned with stories of strange sounds. Low, throbbing hums, like the beating of great wings, or the echo of distant roars hidden in the wind. Yet for all its eerie presence, the watchtower was silent, lifeless. No one had entered its gates in living memory. It stood as it always had, overlooking the sea, waiting. It was on a morning thick with fog that Alira, a stranger in the village, first heard the stories of the tower. She had arrived quietly, just another traveller passing through the small, weathered town of Vireth. The villagers were used to wanderers, for the road that passed through their town led nowhere of great importance, only to the edge of the world itself. Alira had no past, or at least none that she spoke of. War had taken everything from her, her family, her home, her future. She had lived like a ghost, drifting from place to place, seeking something she couldn't name. It was only when she reached Vireth, with its cold sea winds and ever-present mist, that the stories began to stir something deep within her, something she had thought long buried. The Dragon's Watchtower, the innkeeper told her one night, as the fire crackled low in the hearth. His voice was rough, his eyes dark with the weight of old memories. They say it watches over us still, though no one knows if it's a protector or a curse. Some nights you can see lights at the top, flickering like stars. No one goes near it anymore. It's best left alone. Elira said nothing, but the tower had already taken root in her mind. She could feel it pulling at her, a soft, insistent whisper that grew louder with each passing day. She asked no more questions, but in her heart, she knew she had to see it for herself. At dawn, when the mist hung thick over the village like a shroud, Elira set out alone. The path to the Watchtower was steep and narrow, barely more than a trail of worn stones that twisted through the hills. The air grew colder the higher she climbed, and the mist seemed to press in on her from all sides, muffling the world until there was nothing but the sound of her own breath and the soft crunch of gravel beneath her boots. When she reached the top, the tower loomed above her, larger than she had imagined. Its dark stones were etched with age, weathered by countless storms. There was no sign of life, no flickering lights, no distant hum of wings. Only silence. The great iron door at its base was closed, but as she approached, it swung open with a creak that echoed through the fog. Elira hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. The threshold was dark, the air beyond heavy with the scent of ancient stone and something else, something faint and wild that prickled at the edge of her senses. For a moment, she considered turning back, returning to the safety of the village below. But something deep within her stirred, a sense of destiny, or perhaps doom, that had been waiting for this very moment. With a final breath, she stepped across the threshold and into the shadows of the dragon's watchtower. The inside of the tower was colder than the air outside, as if the very stones held the chill of centuries past. Elira's breath came in soft clouds as she stood on the threshold, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light. The fog had followed her inside, swirling around her feet like ghostly tendrils. And the silence was so complete that even the sound of her heartbeat felt loud. Ahead of her, a spiral staircase wound upward, disappearing into the gloom. The steps were narrow and uneven, worn down by time and use, though it had been ages since anyone had climbed them. Elira hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the tower pressing down on her, the air thick with forgotten memories. But the pull was stronger now, that same whisper she had felt since hearing the stories in the village, urging her forward. She began to climb. Each step echoed faintly, as though the stone walls were listening. As she ascended, she noticed carvings etched into the walls. Dragons, coiled and fierce, their wings outstretched as if they were guarding the tower itself. The detail in the carvings was astonishing. Each scale and talon rendered with care, as though the stone had once been alive. But there was something else, too. Something hidden within the swirling patterns of wings and fire. Something that made the hair on the back of her neck prickle. The deeper she climbed, the more she felt it, an invisible presence watching her from the shadows. The tower grew darker as she rose, the narrow slits of windows offering little light. A dampness clung to the air, and the scent of stone and earth became more pronounced. But Alira pressed on, driven by an unseen force, her heart beating a steady rhythm in her chest. Finally, after what felt like hours, the stairs ended in a small circular chamber. The room was empty, save for a single dais in the center, and at its heart a faint glowing light. It was the only source of the illumination, a pale orb that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic glow, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. Alira stepped closer, her pulse quickening. The light seemed to call to her, and though she couldn't explain it, she knew this was what she had been searching for. There was something ancient and powerful about the orb, something that resonated deep within her, as though her very soul recognized it. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingertips grazing its surface. As soon as she touched it, the air in the room shifted. A low hum filled the space, soft at first, then growing louder, deeper. It was the sound of something vast and alive, a presence that had been dormant for centuries, now stirring. The light from the orb flared brighter, casting long shadows on the stone walls. And suddenly, from the darkness, a voice emerged. "Do you know what it is you seek?" Alira froze. The voice was not human. It was soft, yet filled the room with a power that made the ground beneath her tremble. It was like the wind itself had learned to speak, and it echoed in her bones, in her blood. I seek the truth," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "About the tower, about the dragons, and about me." For a long moment the voice did not respond. The orb pulsed, its light dimming slightly, then flaring again, as though it was considering her words. When it spoke again, it was softer, almost thoughtful. "Truth is not given freely, nor is it what you expect. You have come to the place where secrets dwell, where shadows hold the past and the future in their grip. But the truth you seek has a price." Alira's hand trembled as she pulled it back from the orb. The air around her seemed heavier now, as if the very stones of the tower had come to life. She felt as though she was standing on the edge of something vast and unknown, something that could change everything if she let it. "What price?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. The light flickered, casting shifting shadows across the chamber. "That too is a choice," the voice said, and Alira felt a cold shiver run down her spine. One that will reveal itself when the time is right. Before she could respond, a gust of wind swept through the chamber, though there were no windows open to the sky. The light from the orb flickered one last time, then dimmed, plunging the room into near darkness. In the distance, far below, she thought she heard something, a low, distant rumble like the beating of wings. The voice was gone, but the silence that followed was even more unsettling. Alira stood there for a long moment, the weight of the tower pressing in around her. The truth, the voice had said, was not given freely. And she knew then, with the certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the Watchtower had only begun to reveal its secrets. The climb had only just begun. The chill clung to Alira as she descended the stairs. The light from the orb had faded entirely, leaving her with only the faint glow of the carvings on the walls to guide her steps. Each flicker of her torch cast dancing shadows over the ancient engravings, turning the once frozen dragons into swirling, writhing shapes that seemed to come alive in the dark. As she moved, her fingers brushed against the carvings, rough, cold, and strangely familiar. Alira could feel the weight of centuries in every groove and line. These were no ordinary etchings. They held a deeper meaning, one that seemed to unravel with each step she took. The dragons depicted here were not the ferocious monsters of legend. Their wings were outstretched, their eyes not filled with fury, but with something far older and more complex. Wisdom, perhaps, or sorrow. The further she descended, the more the carving shifted. What had begun as dragons in flight soon became a story told in stone. Alira stopped, her heart racing as she realized what she was seeing. These carvings were not just decorations. They were a history, a forgotten one. In one panel, a group of humans stood before the dragons, their heads bowed. The dragons' wings formed a protective barrier, enclosing the people in their shadow. There was no fear in their faces, only trust. The next carving was darker, a sky filled with fire, dragons and men locked in battle, their fates entwined. In the center of it all was the Watchtower, standing tall amidst the chaos, its light a beacon against the flames. But it was the final carving that sent a chill through Alira's bones. In this last image, a single dragon stood atop the tower, its wings curled around something, a glowing orb like the one she had touched. But the dragon's eyes were hollow, its body cracked and fading into the stone. Below it, the land lay in ruins, scorched by fire, and in the distance, figures moved. Humans, but not like the ones from before. Their forms were twisted, dark, consumed by shadows. Alira stared at the carving for a long time, her heart heavy with a growing sense of dread. This was no legend. This was a warning. The Watchtower had been built not just to guard against danger, but to signal the end of a pact. A pact that, it seemed, had already been broken. Her mind spun as she tried to piece together the fragments of the story. The villagers had spoken of dragons as monsters, creatures that had been driven away by heroes long ago. But the truth carved into these walls told a different tale, one of betrayal, not of dragons, but of men. The dragons had once been protectors, guardians of a fragile balance between their kind and humanity. And now, the Watchtower stood as a remnant of that forgotten time, a reminder of a bond shattered by greed and fear. The voice she had heard in the chamber above echoed in her mind. The truth you seek has a price. Alira felt a sudden weight pressing down on her. The balance had already begun to shift, and she had stumbled into the heart of it. She was not meant to be here, not as a mere observer. The Watchtower had called to her for a reason, and she could feel the tendrils of that reason winding tighter around her, like the very mist that clung to the tower's stones. As she continued her descent, the air grew colder still, and the shadows deepened. The carvings seemed to press closer, their figures twisting and turning in the dim light. Alira tried to push the growing sense of unease aside, but it gnawed at her, its presence as thick as the mist outside. At last, she reached the base of the stairs, where a narrow corridor stretched before her, its walls lined with yet more carvings. But these were different. Unfamiliar shapes, symbols that hummed with a faint, almost inaudible sound. Alira's eyes were drawn to the far end of the corridor, where a single door stood, slightly ajar, its edges glowing with a soft golden light. She hesitated. The pull that had driven her this far was stronger now, almost overwhelming. Her every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to leave the tower and its secrets behind. But she knew there could be no turning back. Not now. The truth was within reach, but the price loomed just ahead. With a deep breath, Alira pushed open the door. The room beyond was unlike anything she had seen in the tower thus far. The walls were smooth, without carvings, but they seemed to pulse with an energy that hummed through the air. In the center of the room stood a figure, tall, cloaked in shadow, but unmistakably dragon-shaped. Its eyes, two faint glimmers of light, regarded her with an intensity that made her heart pound. "You have seen the truth," the figure whispered, its voice like the rustling of ancient leaves. "Now, you must decide what to do with it." Alira's breath caught in her throat. The carvings, the voice, the Watchtower itself, it had all been leading to this moment. The choice the dragon had spoken of was not just for the past, but for the future. And the future, it seemed, rested in her hands. The shadow loomed before her, vast, ancient, and otherworldly. Alira could feel the weight of its gaze even before she fully understood its shape. It was no ordinary dragon that stood before her, but something older, something carved from the fabric of time itself. Its form flickered in and out of focus, as though it did not fully belong to this world. The faint light from its eyes, two pinpricks of molten gold, cut through the dimness of the room, pinning her in place. "You have come far," the voice said again, low and thunderous, like a storm rolling across distant mountains. It was not the same voice she had heard when she touched the orb, but something deeper, more primal. "But the road ahead is longer still." Alira could not move. Her heart raced in her chest. but her body felt frozen, locked in the grip of some unseen power. The figure of the dragon shimmered, its scales gleaming faintly in the half-light. There was no malice in its eyes, but something far more dangerous. The cold, eternal patience of a creature that had watched centuries pass in silence. "What is this place?" Elira finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling as it echoed in the chamber. "Why have I been brought here?" The dragon's eyes did not waver. "You seek answers," it said. "But you are not the first to seek them. This tower is older than the stories told by men. It was built not by human hands, but by us, by those who once walked the skies in fire and shadow. The Watchtower was a gift to your kind, a bond forged in trust. But men have short memories. They forget their promises, and in forgetting, they sow the seeds of ruin." The dragon shifted, its form darkening as it spoke, its wings stretched, the tips brushing the edges of the chamber. And for a moment, Elira felt as though the walls themselves were closing in on her. She could barely breathe, the air thick with an ancient power that thrummed through her very bones. "The Watchtower was built as a beacon," the dragon continued, "a signal of warning, a guide for when the balance between our worlds would begin to falter. You, Elira, have come here because that balance is shifting once again. The pact has been broken, and now the flames that once united us have begun to burn out of control." Elira swallowed hard, her mouth dry. "What do you mean? What happened to the dragons? Why did they leave?" The dragon's gaze darkened, and for a moment the room seemed to grow colder. "We did not leave," it said. "We were forgotten. When men no longer needed our protection, they turned away, their hearts clouded by ambition and greed. They no longer saw us as allies, but as threats, creatures to be feared, to be hunted. We withdrew, retreated into the shadows, for our kind had no place in a world that no longer honored the old ways." The dragon's voice softened, a note of sorrow threading through the thunderous tones. "But the Watchtower remained, waiting as it always has. For there will come a time when the flames of war will rise again, and the dragons will return. But this time, we will not come as protectors." Elira felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Then why am I here?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Why did the tower call to me?" The dragon's eyes burned brighter, and the air around them seemed to tremble with unspoken power. "Because you carry the flame," it said. "The flame that has been passed down through generations, hidden in the hearts of those who still remember. You are the key, Elira. The choice has always been yours." Elira's mind raced. The carvings, the orb, the voice, they had all been leading to this moment. She had thought herself an outsider, a wanderer with no purpose. But now she realized the truth. She was part of the story, a story that had been unfolding long before she was born. The dragon stepped forward, its form towering over her. But there was no threat in its movements, only a quiet, solemn power. "The balance is fragile," it said. "The world stands on the edge of chaos. The Watchtower's light has dimmed, but it can still burn bright again. You must decide whether to reignite the flame or let the shadows consume us all." Alira's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, a choice that seemed too great for any one person to bear. But she knew deep down that she could not turn away. The Watchtower had called her here for a reason, and now the fate of both worlds, the world of men and the world of dragons, rested in her hands. "What must I do?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the fear that clawed at her insides. The dragon's eyes gleamed brighter than ever before. "You must carry the flame," it said. "But know this, the flame comes with a price. To light the path ahead, you must be willing to walk it alone." For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, and in the silence, Alira felt the full weight of what lay before her. The Watchtower was not just a beacon, it was a promise, a bond that tied her to a destiny she had never asked for. But now, it was hers to fulfill. With a slow, deep breath, Alira nodded. "I will carry the flame." The dragon's form shimmered, and as it began to fade, its voice echoed one final time through the chamber. "Then the path is yours to walk, Alira, but remember, hope and danger are one and the same. Choose wisely." And then the dragon was gone, leaving only the quiet hum of the tower's ancient stones and the flicker of a distant flame that now burned in Alira's heart. The days following Alira's encounter with the dragon passed in a blur, though time itself seemed to slow, as if the world held its breath. The village of Virith, once so distant and detached from the weight of history, began to change. The mists thickened, creeping down from the cliffs like a living thing, and a strange quiet settled over the land. People whispered of strange lights in the sky, of shadows moving in the fog that weren't human. Yet none dared speak aloud what they truly feared. The dragons were returning. Alira felt the weight of this knowledge settle over her like a mantle. The dragon's words echoed in her mind. Hope and danger are one and the same. She carried the flame now, though she still did not fully understand what that meant. There was no turning back, no denying that something vast and ancient had been set in motion. But the path forward remained shrouded in mystery, as elusive as the mists that clung to the Watchtower. Each morning, she climbed the steep hill to the tower's base, her steps growing more familiar with the path that twisted upward through the fog. Each day, the Watchtower felt more alive, as if it were waking from a long slumber, the stones thrumming with a silent energy that vibrated beneath her fingertips. Inside, the tower was never quite the same. The air felt charged, and the shadows shifted as if watching her every move. But it was the orb that haunted her most. When she stood before it now, it no longer glowed with the same eerie light as it had on that first night. Instead, it pulsed faintly, like a heart on the edge of life, waiting for something, her perhaps, to bring it back to full flame. Each time she touched it, she felt the flicker of the dragon's presence, like a breath in the dark, reminding her that the choice was still hers. The villagers grew restless. Alira could see it in their eyes, the way they glanced toward the tower when they thought no one was watching. Rumors spread quickly. Some said the dragons would come in peace, others that they would bring war and fire. No one knew which to believe, but the unease was undeniable. They turned to Alira, not with open questions, but with silent expectation, sensing that she, the strange girl who had dared to climb the Watchtower, knew more than she let on. It was on the darkest night yet, when the mist seemed thicker than ever, and the air hummed with the promise of something breaking, that the light atop the tower flared bright. A golden, radiant glow burst from the top, illuminating the sky for miles around, casting long shadows over the cliffs and village below. The villagers gathered in the streets, their faces turned upward in awe and fear, murmuring prayers or curses under their breath. Alira stood at the top of the tower, the orb in her hands, its warmth seeping into her skin. The air crackled with tension, and far off she heard it, the unmistakable rumble of wings. At first it was faint, barely audible over the howling wind, but it grew louder, closer, until the very stones beneath her feet vibrated with their approach. The dragons were coming. She watched as the skies darkened with their forms, great shadows that circled the tower like ghosts of a forgotten age. Their wings cut through the mist, their scales glinting faintly in the tower's golden light. Alira's heart raced, not with fear, but with a strange, electric anticipation. She had expected this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the sight of them. So vast, so powerful, and yet so silent, as if waiting for something. The choice, the flame. Alira knew now what the dragon had meant. The dragons were not coming as conquerors, nor as saviors. They were coming for her, for the flame she carried, for the ancient pact that had been broken long ago. And she understood, with a clarity that pierced through her fear, that the flame was not just a symbol of hope, but a force, a power that could either restore the balance between dragons and men or shatter it forever. The villagers below cried out as the dragons descended, their wings casting shadows over the land. Alira gripped the orb tightly, feeling its pulse synchronize with her own heartbeat. The light from the orb flared brighter, casting the chamber in an ethereal glow. And in that moment, she knew the truth of the price. To reignite the flame, To restore the balance, she would have to give herself fully to it. There could be no half measures, no retreat. The flame demanded sacrifice. Her will, her fear, her very being, and she would walk this path alone, as the dragon had said. Alira closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. Then, with a steady hand, she lifted the orb toward the sky, releasing it into the air. It hovered for a moment, suspended in the golden light, before it exploded in a brilliant burst of fire and flame, lighting the skies with a radiant glow. The dragons paused, their eyes turning toward the Watchtower, their ancient gaze falling on Alira. In that moment, they recognized her, not as an enemy, not as a stranger, but as the one who had reignited the flame. The balance was hers to restore. The Watchtower had served its purpose, and as Alira descended the winding stairs for the last time, she knew that the path ahead was uncertain. But the flame once more burned bright, and in the shadows of the mist, the dragons remembered.